Okay, so I'm going to do another standard bike service. Bike service that would cost you around about £30 or £40 in most bike shops. Got all my tools laid out. It's the same tools that I usually use. So you've got your 4, 5, 6 and 8 Allen keys. I've got a small star screwdriver, a small flat bladed screwdriver. I've got a set of long nose pliers. I've got a 15mm pedal spanner. I've got my derailleur hanger alignment tool. For cleaning and lubricating purposes, I've got a tin of disc brake cleaner spray. I've got chain oil for oiling the chain, and I've got bike grease for greasing the seat post, and I've got an old rag just to use for cleaning purposes. Okay, so I've actually already done a little bit of work on this bike. I'll quickly just cover what I've done. So I've went around both wheels and checked to make sure that there are no loose spokes, and I've checked to see if there were any buckles in the wheels, and I've also secured the wheels with the quick release screws. So to check that the spokes, there's no loose spokes, what you do is you find a starting point on the wheel. The valve is a good thing to use to judge one full rotation. So pinch the spokes on both sides all the way around and just check for any loose or slack spokes. Spin the wheel and look at the gap between the brake pads and the rim to check for any buckles. Obviously you can only do that if you've got rubber brake pads and your rim is a braking surface. If it's a disc brake, you're not going to be able to judge it that way. There were a couple of very small buckles on both wheels, but like they were about probably less than a millimetre, so I've already trued them out. Putting the wheel into the dropouts, you just undo the quick release skewer, make sure that you lift the wheels properly into the dropouts on the frame, make sure that the wheels are centred in the frame, and lock the quick release skewers off. Make sure that they're nice and firm, but they shouldn't be so tight that you cannot undo them by hand. So the wheels are secure, the spokes are fine, and the wheels are running true. So now I'm going to go around and start to torque up all the bolts on the bike. So again, I'll start off at the front of the bike here. So this type of stem, when it's only got one bolt on the top of the stem and there are no bolts at the back, for this type of stem, the bolt on the top is the one that tightens the handlebars to the bike. So it's really important that you tighten the Allen bolt on the top of this type of stem. I've also got two more Allen bolts up here where the handlebars attach to the stem, so I want to make sure that they are tight as well. Okay, so they look like 6mm Allen bolts. Yep. Okay, so tightening these, you're doing them bit by bit, one at a time. So you don't want to tighten one all the way in and then do the other one. You want to do both of them a little bit at a time. So one a little bit, then another one a little bit, then back to the first one a little bit, then another one. You want to tighten them evenly. That's fine, they're both tight. And there's a wee rubber cap on top of this Allen bolt on top of the stem. It can be quite difficult, quite tricky to get off. See if I can use my screwdriver to remove it. There we go. Okay. And that's a 6mm Allen bolt as well. There we go. That's nice and tight. When you're tightening these bolts up, you want to tighten them until the Allen key comes to a stop, and if you feel at that point that you really have to force it, that should be fine. You shouldn't have to do it any more than that. This is an adjustable stem. It can be raised or lowered. Not that common. There's always usually another bolt underneath here on these types of stem, and that's what allows you to, if you loosen that bolt on the underside off, that allows you to rotate it up or down, and then tighten it off just to keep it in position. But with these types of stem, the really important bolt is the bolt on the top, because as I said, that's the one that secures the handlebars to the bike. Right, okay, so that's the handlebars done. I'm going to check the pedals and the crank arms. So I'll do the pedals first. 15mm spanner. Again, always bear in mind that the left sided pedal is reverse threaded, so it's anti-clockwise to tighten the left sided pedal. The right sided pedal is just normal, so it's clockwise to tighten. Okay, so because I'm leaning across the bike to do this, I'm just going to push it down from this side, which is anti-clockwise on that pedal, and the same for this one. Down is clockwise, so that just needed tightened a wee touch. That other pedal was fine. It's an 8mm Allen key for the crank bolts. Crank bolts are just normal threaded on both sides, don't need to worry about. So I'm pulling up, which would be clockwise on the other side, to tighten that, and on this one, downwards in a clockwise direction. I'm just grabbing the crank arm on the opposite side when I'm tightening this, holding it still, makes it nice and easy to tighten. Okay, so both crank arms are fully tightened. Another thing that you should check with this type of headset is you want to check that there's no play in the headset. In other words, there's not any movement, or you can't wiggle it at all within the frame. So that's nice and smooth and nice and firm. With these types of, they call this a threaded headset, with these types of headset, there are a couple of big hexagonal fittings here, and these do not tighten the handlebars to the bike. I think a lot of people, when they see these big hexagonal bolts here, they assume that this is what's keeping the handlebars tightened onto the bike, but they're not. These just tighten your fork, these tighten the top of your fork in the frame. With this type of setup, the handlebars are actually a separate piece altogether, and they slot down into the inside of the frame, the head tube here. They slot down into the top of this, inside this, and into the actual top of your fork, and they tighten inside the fork. So it can be difficult to explain without opening it all up and demonstrating it, but the basic premise is that the bolt on the top of the stem is the bolt that tightens your handlebars with this type of headset. These two bolts here, they hold the fork and the frame, so it's two separate fittings. Okay, so I've got a headset spanner which will allow me to check that these two big hexagonal bolts are tight. If you don't have one of these, you can use a big adjustable spanner, but provided the handlebars are turning nice and smoothly and there's no play, you probably won't need to touch this. And you could put a big adjustable spanner on it and just check to make sure that they are not loose. There's actually two big hexagonal bolts here. There's one in the bottom, which is the one that actually tightens your fork into the frame, and there's a second one on top, which is just like it just locks it in place. So the big bolt in the bottom is the one that actually tightens the fork into the frame, and the bolt on top of that just locks that in position and keeps it tight so that it will never undo. Apologies for my pretty basic explanations. I was never one for paying a lot of attention when it came to English at school. Okay, so I've undone the one at the top, and I'm just going to check to make sure that the bottom one is is tight, and it's tight, and you don't want to over tighten it again. If you over tighten it, the handlebars will not turn smoothly. So the one at the bottom's nice and, it's nice and tight, and there's no play there. Handlebars are turning smoothly. So I'm just going to lock the one on top off, and that's fine. Just tighten it till it's nice and snug. You don't need to go mental. And there we go. That's the handlebars done. So that's the front of the bike done basically. The pedals and the cranks are done. I'll use my 5mm Allen key just now to just check to make sure that the front derailleur is properly tight and secured to the frame. I can see from looking at this front derailleur that it is positioned correctly on the frame. It's in line with the chain rings, and it is the correct height above the chain rings in the front as well. So I know that I won't need to adjust the position of it. I'm just going to make sure that it is secured properly to the frame. And again, you just want to tighten it until it comes to a stop. You don't want to force the Allen bolt, that's fine. Okay, what we'll do as well is I will check to make sure that the derailleur hanger is tightened to the frame properly, and it's a 5mm as well. There's a wee bolt here just at the top of the derailleur hanger, and I will just a wee slight turn just to make sure that's properly tight. Right, okay, this is going to be a relatively quick service, fairly straightforward bike. Okay, so I'll check the front and rear gears now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into first gear in the front, which is the small chain ring. I'm going to put it into the highest gear in the back. This is an 8-speed cassette on the back. So I'm putting it into 8th gear in the back, and I'm going to just manually, while I'm spinning the pedals, I'm going to just manually push the rear derailleur in until it goes onto the big chain ring, and then I'm going to just very gently keep pushing it. And if at this point it was going over the back of the big cog, or if the derailleur cage was going into the spokes, I would know that the limit screws need adjusting. The limit screws are there to prevent your derailleur from moving any further than it should in both directions. So you've got a low limit screw, which is the point, which sets the point at which the derailleur can move no further towards your low gears, and you've got a high limit screw which sets the point at which your derailleur cannot move any further beyond that point towards your high gears. So it sets the outer limits that the derailleur can move. So there you go, I'm pushing that now as far as it will go, and it's fine. It's going on to the biggest cog, which is the low gear, and it's not going any further. It's also travelling back out onto the highest gear, which is the smallest cog. So I know that the limit screws are set up correctly on that. Really, when you're doing this, you should disconnect the cable as well, just to make sure that the cable is not playing a part when it comes to the limits of the derailleur. That's fine. Okay, so I'm having a look at the derailleur hanger, and it does look quite straight, so I don't think I'll bother removing the derailleur in this case. What we'll do is, I can see already that the derailleur is not in any danger of moving too close in towards the wheel. So as long as I can index these gears and get them working properly, I'm not going to bother checking the hanger to see if it's straight, because it looks straight. So I did 5mm, so I'm just going to check to make sure that the derailleur itself is properly tight, which it is. And start off with it on the highest gear at the back, and you can tell if I reconnected the cable. There we go. So 8 to 7 is fine, 7 to 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Back up the gears again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, these gears are indexing correctly. There's no need for me to make any adjustment to this. The cable is a little bit frayed here at the end. It's not too bad, it's just maybe 3 or 4 strands that have come away because it doesn't have a cable end on it. So I will tidy that up. I'll just wrap them back up properly and then we'll fit a cable end onto that to prevent that from happening again. But the gears are shifting fine, so the cable's okay. Front gears, okay, so I've got it on the small chain ring at the front, which is first gear, and I'm going to move it from the highest gear to the lowest gear at the back and make sure it's not rubbing on either side of the derailleur cage, which is not. Okay, so there's a wee tiny bit of rub there when it's in the lowest gear at the back and when it's in the first gear at the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo the low limit screw, maybe a quarter turn, which should, as long as there's no cable tension involved and there's not that cable's got a little bit of slack in it, that should allow the cage to move over a touch towards the centre of the bike, and that will prevent the chain from rubbing in the cage. So, yep, I can see that there, just a wee quarter turn. I can see the derailleur cage just moved across a touch, and there you go, it's no longer rubbing. Okay, I've got the highest gear. Okay, so because I've adjusted that limit screw and it's moved the derailleur cage across a little touch, it's now rubbing on the outside part of the cage. So, as I've said before, you should never really ride your bike on your low gear at the front and your highest gear at the back. That's cross chaining, the chain's coming across at the most extreme angle. You shouldn't be riding your bike like that anyway. So it's more important that the chain is not rubbing when it's in the lowest gear at the back and the lowest gear at the front, because that's how you would ride. What we'll do though is just to try and optimise it to get it so that it's rubbing the least on either side of the cage. I'll just I'll tighten that low screw again, maybe like 1/8 of a turn. There you go, so that's prevented the worst of the rubbing on the outside, but as I say, it's more important that it doesn't rub on the inside when it's in the lowest gear at the front. So back up to the lowest gear at the back, and yeah, it's no longer rubbing on the inside. That's fine, I'm happy with that. If I bring it back out any further, it's just going to rub on the inside. And as I say, that's the way you ride your bike. When you're in low gears at the front, you should always be in your lower gears at the back. You should never be in your low gear at the front and then put it all the way across to your highest gear at the back. So it's more important that it's not rubbing when you're in your low gear at the back. Okay, so now I'm going to put it up to the middle chain ring at the front. Now, the middle chain ring at the front, you should be able to go to either side of your cassette at the back, hopefully without any rub on the cage. So that's fine, it's not rubbing on the inside of the cage when it's in the lowest gear at the back. Knock all the way down to the highest gear, very slight bit of rub there. So what we'll do to try and just optimise that, I will use the adjuster barrel here to adjust, I'll turn it half turn anti-clockwise. This is the adjuster barrel up at the shifter, and what that will do is that will tighten the cable tension just a fraction, which should hopefully pull the cage across just a touch, which will help to prevent the chain from rubbing on the outside of the cage. It's still rubbing a wee bit, so when we knock it back into the first gear, it just makes it easier to use it, turn the adjuster barrel. So I'll do another half turn anti-clockwise. Yeah, that's fine, it's not rubbing anymore. There is a noise there, but it's just this little plastic guide, which is this little red, it's like a plastic sticker that comes on the derailleurs, so that when you're setting them up, it shows you where to position it in terms, in relation to the teeth on your chain ring. So that's common, that always ends up rubbing in the chain. what I'll do is I'll just take that off actually, that wee sticker. That's it there, gone. Okay, so it's no longer rubbing on the cage. Okay, so it's now rubbing on the inside. So again, just to try to optimise it, I'm going to try and optimise it to set it up the best I possibly can. I'm going to do another half turn back again, clockwise, which is going to loosen the cable tension off a little bit. So that's it on the lowest gear at the back, so it's furthest across towards the centre of the bike in the back, and it's rubbing very, very slightly on the inside of the cage. So jumped off the smallest chain ring at the back there, so I'll need to adjust that limit screw. That's a high limit screw at the back. It came out too far, the derailleur there, so I'll sort that out in a minute. Okay, so it's not rubbing on the outside of the cage, so again I'm just going to undo that. It is starting to rub, so I'm using the adjuster barrel to make slight cable tension adjustments and to try and get this just right if I can. So at the point at which I increase the cable tension enough to pull the cage across so that the chain will stop rubbing when it's on the highest gear, furthest across to that side. When I shift it back up, it's then rubbing on the other side, so you're never going to get it so that it's not rubbing on either side. So it's just a case of get it rubbing the least amount possible on both sides, so you're just optimising it in other words. So it's rubbing very, very slightly on the inside of the cage there. So you can end up doing it like a quarter turn, an eighth of a turn until you get it just right, the adjuster barrel. Okay, that's as good as I'm going to get it. It's barely rubbing at all on both sides now with the cage. So you're pretty much getting your full range of gears at the back when you're on the middle chain ring at the front. Big chain ring at the front. Okay, so it is now rubbing so it's on the big chain ring at the front and it's on the smallest chain ring, the smallest cog at the back, which is your highest gear. Now you will ride your bike like this. It's fine to ride your bike with the big chain ring at the front and then your high gears at the back. That's how you would ride your bike anyway. What you shouldn't be doing is you shouldn't be riding it on the big chain ring at the front, which is your highest gear in the front, and on the lowest gear at the back, which is the biggest cog. So you should never ride small to small or big to big. Okay, so what's happening here is the derailleur is moving across too far at the front and the chain is rubbing on the inside of the cage. So what I can do is, to prevent that from happening, I'm going to shift it back onto the middle chain ring first, and I'm going to tighten the high limit screw. And when I tighten the high limit screw, that will set the limit as to how far across this cage can move. Tightening it will prevent it from moving across, so the more I tighten it, the less it's going to be able to move out the way. Okay, so I'm just going to high limit screw and I'm just going to tighten it a half turn to begin with. We shift it back up again and it's no longer rubbing on the cage, so that's worked. So it's no longer rubbing on the inside of the cage. Now, when I move it up back to the lower gears at the back, like I say, you should never ride like this anyway. Again, it's rubbing on the cage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten that low limit screw, high limit screw. I'm going to tighten the high limit screw. I'll do it another half turn. That's fine. it's still shifting okay up onto the big chainring, and it's on the highest gear at the back, it's not rubbing on the cage here, and when I put it up onto the smallest chainring at the back, that is still rubbing a bit. Okay, so when you're on the big chainring at the front, you should really be able to use probably half the cassette, to a wee bit more than half the cassette at the back. So I'm just going to keep tightening this limit screw until it stops rubbing on the inside of the cage, and what I don't want to do is tighten it so much that it prevents the derailleur from moving out far enough, which would then cause it to rub on the outside of the cage. So it's just again a case of getting it right. So again, I'm going to just do a quarter turn this time now. There we go. See. So now what's happening is it's rubbing very, very slightly on the outside of the cage, because by tightening the high limit screw, the derailleur can only, every time I tighten this, the derailleur can only move out a smaller amount each time. Basically the limit screw prevents it from moving out, so every time I tighten it, if I tighten it all the way in, the derailleur wouldn't be able to move out at all. So it's now rubbing on the outside of the cage, which is what you don't want when it's in the high gear at the back. So I'm going to just undo it high. I'm going to undo it maybe like an 1/8 of a turn, just a fraction. And there we go. So it's no longer rubbing on the outside of the cage, and you're getting right up to like third gear before it even starts to rub on the inside. So it's only really rubbing on the inside when you're in first and second gear at the back, but like I say, you should never ride in that combination, high gear at the front, low gear at the back. Okay. So that's the gears tuned fine, and what I'll do is I'll just make sure that the pinch bolts or the anchor bolts, which is where the cable attaches to the derailleurs, I'm just going to make sure that they're properly tight. Front pinch bolt's fine. This is actually, it looks like it's I can never remember until I try. I've done it so many times with these. It's either a 9 or a 10mm. I think it's a 9mm spanner. I've got a 9 or a 10 here. No. Okay, I'm going to guess it, it's a 9. See if I get it right and save me a trip back to the kitchen. Yes, it's a 9. Right, okay, that's fine. Sometimes the pinch bolts where you attach the cable to the rear derailleur, sometimes it's a little bolt, you know, an actual hexagonal bolt as opposed to an Allen bolt. So yeah, 9mm. Okay, that's secured properly as well. So the gears are fine. Now the wheels are secured, all the bolts are torqued up. What I can do as well, again I've said this before, I'll just check the brake arms, bolts in the front of the brake arms to make sure that they're tight, but you know, I don't know that I've ever come across a bike where the brake arms were not fastened securely. Okay, so the last thing that I've still got to do on this now is the brakes, adjust the front of your brakes. Okay, so when I'm adjusting the brakes, I've explained before, you want to make sure that the posts on either side of the brake pads, at the point of the brake, when the brakes are making contact with the rim and you're pulling the lever, you want to make sure that the posts are level, they're not at an angle, and also when you're pulling the brake tight, you want to make sure that you've got enough space there where you can get your fingers between the lever and the handlebars. The lever should never come right up to the handlebars. Okay, so the angle of those brake pads are actually okay. They are also in line with the rims. The brake pads are lined up with the rims. And the other thing that you want to make sure when you're setting up your brakes is you want to make sure that the brake pads are either level with the rim or they're towed in slightly towards the front of the bike. They should never be towed out the way. that means that you're not going to get very effective braking, and it also can cause squeaky brakes. Okay, so this pad on the right hand side is towed out the way, so it's the back of the pad is touching the rim before the front of the pad when I'm pulling the brakes on. So I'm just going to adjust that and undo this and just adjust the angle of it. Just pull the back of the pad further out from the rim in the front. That's a lot better now. Good. Okay, both of these pads are set up, both of the brake pads are positioned, they're fine the way they're set up now. The only other thing is, so I want to make sure that the cable tension's right, I want to make sure that I'm pulling the brake tight, that the lever, as I say, there should be enough space for you to get your fingers through there. That's just a good way to judge it. It's not like there's a reason that you should be able to get your fingers through there, but it's just a good way to judge the amount of space that you should have when you're pulling your brake lever tight. The only other thing that I need to do now is I need to adjust these little screws at the bottom of on either side at the bottom of the brake arms to make sure that the pads are equally equidistant from the rim. So the pads are the same, the space between each brake pad and the rim and the wheel is the same on both sides. Okay, so this one, the brake pad here on the right hand side of the bike is a lot closer to the rim than the one on the left, and I can see the reason for that. This screw's tightened all the way in, which has pulled this brake arm across, and this screw here isn't, it's just half out. So I'm going to undo this screw, and that will allow that brake arm to move back across, and I can see that it already is towards the rim. That's fine, that's right now. Same amount of distance between both pads and the rim on the other side. Okay, see what it looks like at the back. Okay, well the distance between each pad and the rim is similar on the back, so I don't need to worry about that. Difficult to see here.